All right. Let's give everyone, maybe about 20 seconds to kind of log in and tell everyone, hey, it's time for Tech Art Talk Live. All right. Hey, we do have somebody online, so welcome to Tech Art Talk. Go invite your friends. All right, well, let's get this show on the road. Greetings, Tech Art fans from around the world. Welcome to Tech Art Talk Live. It is 12:30 and my name is Chris and I am going to be your host for today. And welcome back. We've taken a 2-week siesta. I've been on traveling for the last couple weeks, so I haven't been broadcasting for the last 2 weeks. So, did you miss me? I thought so. I thought so. Okay. Well, anyway, we got a jam-packed episode today. So today is the last of our episodes. We're going to covering a Python topic, and it is a very important Python topic in my humble opinion. And because Python naturally does not involve any kind of GUI interface or widgets, for other words, nothing by hand. And so we're going to cover what I consider is probably the most common and the most generic of all the Python widget sets for creating a GUI, and that is called PyQt. Now, PyQt is the Python porting of the Qt library, which is written in C++. And so therefore, it's just kind of like the Python functions that's built on top of the C++ library. But we have a whole bunch to cover today, and there's a lot to cover, and so hold on tight. We're going to go for a ride. We're probably going to go for a little bit longer than we usually go for, but grab onto your shorts because we're going to go take a ride. All right, let me get things going here for my lecture. All right, we should see, okay, introduction to Qt. All right, so welcome. Now, for what we're going to be doing here, I'm going to be using with Python 2.9. Now, Python 2.9 just happens to be the most recent version of Python that I downloaded it. And I know that it does work. And so we are working with PyQt 5. And PyQt 5 is one of the more recent versions. Evidently, it's up to now PyQt 6. And if you're going to use this and you worked on something like in Houdini or with Maya, you might actually be using PySide 2. Now, PySide is another version of PyQt. It's practically the same interface, but it's just a different library that works copacetic. It has something to do with because both Houdini and Maya were created inside using Qt as the overall windowing interface, and having using PyQt within Houdini and within Maya, which doubles up the PyQt, creates some kind of conflict. So they created PySide 2. I don't really understand it, obviously, but this is what you're when you're working with. So when you're working with any kind of Python application outside of like Houdini or Maya, you're going to be using PyQt. When you're using the Qt library inside of the context of maybe Houdini or Maya or any other package, you're probably going to be using PySide 2. Okay, and I do have to give you an overall warning that if you go and look up the documentation for a lot of these functions, you're going to be dealing with something that might go right to the C++. Okay, take a deep breath. Be calm. Don't worry about it. Even though it's written in C++ and it's the terminology is exactly the same. If you apply all of the information that we worked with in creating classes in Python, it's the same thing applies to the classes inside C++ and in Python. They're basically the same. They mirror each other. They reflect each other. They go one for one. And when they ported the Python version of the Qt library, they worked real hard to make sure that the Python classes mirrored the C++ classes exactly. So once you start getting used to the the C++ documentation, it works very well. That doesn't mean to say you won't be able to find Python examples, but just don't be surprised if you start looking up that you end up with C++ documentation. That's the reason why, because it's originally written for C++. All right, so let's get to rolling here, and I am going to change my view here right over to, I'm going to be using Visual Studio for this. And what we want here is, we don't want this, we want, here we go. All right, this is your basic fundamental PyQt. So in the start of this, we're going to have to import the system module, and then what we're going to have to do is import from PyQt5, we're going to import the Qt widgets module. And then from that, we're going to import QApplication. Now, QApplication is one particular class sitting within the Qt widgets. And all we're going to do is we're going to create a new application. And we're going to send that to sys.arguments. So basically send the command line arguments, if there are any, to the application. And then we're going to call this app.exec. And so what this is going to do is it's going to spawn a brand new thread off of the existing thread, and it's going to keep polling on that thread until it basically terminates. So if we were going to execute this, this is what we're going to end up with. Okay. Okay, we don't have anything here. Well, that's because all we've done is we've created a new application. You'll see that's in a polling state, and it's just sitting around spinning, waiting for something to happen. Now, we didn't create any kind of windows. We didn't actually create much of anything, but it is working as expected. So we do know that it is working, and things are working well, so don't fret. This is exactly what's supposed to happen, and in this case, it's just nothing. Okay. Now, suppose we wanted something to happen. Now let's go ahead and actually create an actual basic window. Okay, and so in addition to our Q application, we're going to have to bring in a Q widget because a window is ultimately a widget. A window and a widget basically meaning the same thing. So once we've created our application, then inside of it, we're going to have to declare a widget. And then inside of that widget, we're going to tell it to show. And then ultimately, we're going to execute on the loop and then query for any kind of user interaction. Let's go ahead and execute this bad boy. Okay, and so you see, we ended up with a little window here. Nothing much is going on here, but that's exactly what we did. We said, hey, okay, create us a Q widget, and that's all that we have here. And so to get rid of that, I'm just going to close this button, and voila, and we should be finished. Okay, finish up here. All right. Now, widgets are good, but the Qt library comes along with a little bit more robustness, and we're going to use a QMain window. A QMain window is a type of widget, but it's a child class of the widget, and it allows us to do things a little bit more robust. It supports toolbars, it supports status bars, and dockables. And so here's our QMain window, and I'm going to set this as the startup file, and let's go ahead and execute this. Okay, and ultimately we have the exact same thing. Now, from the offset, it looks exactly like a widget class, and that's what it is. It is a widget class. It's a child of the widget class, but it supports all these other things like toolbars and status bars. But right now we haven't told it how to do anything, so that's all we get is we get nothing. So let's figure out how to actually create some robustness into this. Okay, and so what we're going to do is that main window is fine, but what we probably want to do is, because we're working in Python, what are we going to do? This is an object-oriented language, so what we're going to do is transform this into a class. That's right, gang. We're going to create it into a class. And so we're going to go and let me come up with my class. And let me get this here, set this startup file. Okay. Now, here we are. Now, I've added a bunch of extra stuff. Now, here it is. I've created a new class. I'm going to call my class main window. And we're going to call it as a child of QMain window. And now here in my constructor is when I'm saying, okay, my super is basically call my parent class, call my constructor for where it is. And now, check it out. We're going to be adding some extra goodies to this. And so a QMain window has a special property on it called setWindowTitle. And we're going to call this application my awesome app. And then we're going to put a label inside of it. And the label is nothing but a little text fragment that's going to jump in there, and it's going to sit in there, and we're going to say, put in a simple string. This is a PyQt window. And then we're going to set some alignment with it, and then we're going to set a central widget for it with the label. Now notice here that we had to add a Q label into the widgets that we're loading into, and we had to overall ask the Qt core to said, okay, give us the Qt library. Now, there's a lot of libraries with PyQt, if you haven't guessed in this, and we're only scratching the surface. So hang in there with me. But otherwise, this looks exactly the same, and the only difference is we've converted the QMain window into a class, and then we've added a couple of extra doodads. So let's take a look at this if we render it. Okay, and this is what we get. Just a little window, but you'll see that the title of it says My Awesome App, and the label in Sarah that is just sitting around there says this is a PyQt window. One of the cool things about PyQt and in general is you can move and resize the window, but notice that the content moves and shifts around so that it's always centered. Now this is a controllable parameter, and this is a functionality of the interface itself, and it's something that you can turn on and turn off and take advantage of. Okay. All right. Now, let's talk about events. Now, suppose that we wanted to control how stuff happens. Oops, we quit this. All right. I want to go here. All right. All right. We're creating custom event. Whenever you want to create something to happen, it's going to be called an event. And what you could do is that inside of your class, you could define a callback so that whenever a key button or some kind of event happens, then you call the parent class's super and you say, okay, perform this and do with this whatever that. Okay, now this is fine, but what if you happen to have 100 buttons inside of your interface? Now you're saying 100 buttons, that kind of nonsense. Well, not really when you consider if you get some kind of sophisticated package like Houdini or Maya, then you really are talking about layers upon layers and layers of buttons. And so literally you are dealing with hundreds of buttons. So you really don't want 100 variations of the button class. You maybe want one or two variations if the kind of like the broad super functionality is not being achieved. So what you really want to achieve is something a little bit more efficient. So PyQt created this thing called signals and slots. So instead of intercepting raw events, it's going to sit around, and when it goes into its polling state, it's going to listen for signals. And then once it encounters a signal, it's going to address something called a slot. And a slot is any Python function that tells what's going to happen next once a signal has been found. And so that's all really fine. And I haven't introduced this before, and I figured this is as good a time. Inside of Python, there is a construct called a lambda. And a lambda is a small anonymous function. And it's cool because it's pretty much limited to just one single expression. And here's an example where it says lambda, and then here's its inputs, A and B, and then by default, it returns A plus B. So it's going, in this situation, it's going to return the sum of two arguments. All right, what this might look like is this, and let's see if we can look at this inside of Visual Studio. All right, so here is our function. We're calling it make incrementer. Okay, and then we're going to return it. So basically, we're returning a function. We're returning a Lambda function. And notice that we say, okay, the Lambda is x, and then whatever we're going to do is we're going to say x plus y. So where's this y coming from? Exactly, so it's going to come from our primary function call. And so what we would do is declare this function called make incrementer, and what this is going to do is we're going to return the Lambda function. And you'll notice that the parameter that we're sending here is 84. What it's going to do is when it gets created, it's going to insert into this function y as a value of 84. And then so therefore we now have a new secondary function, a new Lambda function called foo. Notice here that when we print foo of 1, it's going to take the value of 84 and then increment it by 1. Or if we have foo of a value of 10, it's going to take the value of 84, add 10 to it, and return a sum of 94. So let's see how this looks. Okay, very simple. It just basically took 1 and added it to 84, which returns a sum of 85, and 10 plus 84 equals 94. And so Lambda is a way of creating customized callback functions when working with PyQt, because PyQt is kind of limited in the way that it presents its inside of its value. So now all widgets themselves have signals, and you get it to these signals by checking out the library. You got to check out the documentation. Now, in this case, we're looking up a Q widget, and we'll see that it has, whenever you request a custom menu, it creates a signal. Whenever you change the icon, it creates a signal. Whenever you change the icon text, it'll create a signal. And over whenever you change the window title, it'll create a signal. And it kind of looks like this. In the format, you go self, and then the name of your signal name, and then you connect, and then to some function. Now, this function is going to be a function sitting within your class here. And so it works overall just the same. So let's see how this overall looks. Okay. Let me make sure that this is a startup file. All right. So notice here, I have my callback. And here's my callback. The signal is a window title changed. And then when we connect, that means, okay, do this. Whenever the window title changes, do this. And so here it is, we're saying self on window change. Okay, so we have, what is on window title change? Well, on window title change is a function that I created inside of my class that does nothing but take whatever that's sent to it, whatever the argument is, and that it simply prints it out. And so that's all that's really going to happen is we're going to change the value of, here it is, self window title, and we're just going to change or set the window. But notice here that this signal here is set after the window title has been changed. So overall, if we execute this, nothing happens. Why did nothing happen? Well, very simply, if you look at here, we created the callback declaration after we actually set the window title. So the window title got changed first, and then we created the callback. So what we'd have to do in order to get this working is change the order of these two guys. Now, if we change the order of these two guys, then you're going to see something really different happen. Okay, let me change my... Okay. Now notice that I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the callback before creating the set window title, and then it's going to print whatever the window change title is. So let's go ahead and execute this. Okay. Here we go. I forgot, I'm still executing. Okay, now we're into it. We've changed it. Let me make sure this is saved again. There we go. Now, nothing in the window itself changed, but if we look at the console, we say My Awesome App. That means what happens here is the window title change or the exact contents of it were sent to my callback function of OnWindowTitleChange, and it did nothing but change or display what was actually printed here. So it worked exactly, and we've caught our signal, and then we've handled it, and now we are good to go. And so this is a really popular way, and this is how Qt handles all of its events and its signals. Okay, now what about this Lambda business? So if we could do this, we can use Lambda to our advantage. So in here, we're going to set this to whatever the custom file is. And so in this case, I'm going to set the value of 64 here. And so my custom function, what is my custom function? We're just going to print out what the value of the string is, and then we're going to print out the value of B. So this is A and this is B. And then we're going to print both A and B. So let's see what happens once we trigger this label here. Okay, there's our call. There's the result of our callback. And there's our window. Okay, notice that the My Awesome app got called here because it not only did that, but we also sent in for this value of 64, which is a little bit of a customization. You see, whenever you create in PyQt, whenever you create a callback, you just can only tell the function in here. You don't put any kind of parameters in here for the function or whatever arguments are inside of that function. So that's why we use the Lambda. The Lambda helps customize and create an interface in order to send the information of the signal into the function itself. We wouldn't be able to do that if we just declared the function itself, because otherwise we'd have to create a separate function handle signal for every single potential signal that comes through there, and that's kind of a waste of time. All right, so the Lambda is real good for that, for helping that create. All right, let's get rid of this window. Okay, now let's talk about toolbars. We said that working with a QMain window is real good for working with toolbars, and I do mention that. So let's take a look at what our toolbars looks like. So what we're going to do here, you'll notice that it's the exact same process. We're going to say like, okay, TechArt Rocks is our label, and then we're going to create a toolbar, and then we're going to call it My Main Toolbar. So let's see what this overall look like. Okay, My Awesome App, and here we have, okay, here it's named. Here we can see the little toolbar. And if you have a real high resolution monitor, I can't make this any bigger. I should have created some kind of offset here for the font, but you can see a little colon here and a little line down here. And this is our toolbar. This is where our tools are going to go. So very cool, very cute, and it works very good. But notice that we haven't actually installed anything on our toolbar yet, so it's not doing anything. So let's go ahead and install some kind of functionality onto this toolbar. And so what we're going to do is use something called a Q action. A Q action is a PyQt convention, and this tells what's going to happen. And so, what Q actions are cool is because they allow the user to define multiple interface elements within a single object. Like for example, if you wanted to just cut out some text, you could use edit and then the cut button, but you could also use Control X. But so what we could do is we could identify multiple Q actions to one callback, depending on what we're exactly doing. And so this is how we set up one. We're going to say, okay, and here we are. We have a toolbar. And I forgot about that. You got to add the Q widget. We're going to have to add a Q toolbar to our widgets, and then also include a Q action because we're not getting those without those getting included along here. So let's see how this gets set up. So a button action here is a Q action, and we're going to call it my button. Now notice this is just a Q action. This isn't the button itself. And then we're going to say button action, set the status step. So it's going to just say, okay, well, whenever we hover our mouse over it, so we're going to say, this is my button. And then once we hit it's triggered, that means basically once this button's been pressed, then we're going to call on my toolbar button click. And we're just going to click value, and we're going to click the return value of it, and it's going to add a Boolean value, a true or false. And then once we get finished loading up this button action, then we're going to stack it onto our toolbar. So you notice here it says toolbar.add action. So what this is going to add the action to our toolbar. And so now we are stacking up our toolbar. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Come back. All right. Okay, there's everything looking again. Now notice when I right-clicked it, it said my main toolbar. Okay, so here it is. We have an action. Oh, you know what? This is the old one. So we haven't quite gotten anything yet here. So let's go ahead. I forgot I needed to change my executable. So here it is, Q action. We're looking at the wrong one. So let me go ahead and discontinue this one. And we've got the Q action. All right. So let's go ahead and execute this again. Executed the wrong one. Okay. Now you can see that here's my button. And now when I click this, you can see the display here in the console window. Click my button, and we're saying clicking equals false. Okay, yeah, by default, when we just click it, it returns a Boolean value of false. What we'd have to do is set this value to true if we wanted it to be true. So it's a little state indicator that tells us if we are aware of what we're doing. And if we right-click this button, and it says My Main Toolbar, and this basically exposes it if we wanted to show. If we wanted to make it disappear, we would click this button, and then the button disappears. Now, there isn't any way to really get it back, so you'd have to kind of like add some kind of like extra button functionality to bring it back, because since we told it to go away, it's going to stay away. Okay, so what we can also add to this, excuse me, is a status bar. Now, a status bar is a little thing that we can add onto our main window. And it does nothing but report what our status tip is. Notice that when we created a button action, we set the status tip to this is my button. All right, that's fine, but we didn't have anything at this. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a status bar to our widget, and that's going to show us whatever the tooltip is associated with our action. So as you can see, we're slowly, steadily, we're building up on this interface. Now you see that this isn't, but now when I hover my cursor over that, we say my button, but we see the tooltip pop up on the little button. So there's my tooltip, and it said, this is my button. Okay, so this is a way of kind of providing a little bit of extra GUI interface for the user to see what this is actually doing and give us some hint on how to use the particular widget. Okay, now let's say we're going to add some icons. All right, let's see if this is actually going to work. Okay. No, we're going to have to go ahead and fast forward a bunch. Okay, now if you go to this website, p.yusukekamiyamane.com. This guy is a designer and an artist in Japan, and he has produced a kind of a little tiny baby, very small icon set for widgets. And there is about 4,000 of, if you go to this website and you can download this and unpack this in your documents folder. And if you bring it your into your documents folder, you can grab lots of these little baby PNGs, and then what you have to do is paste them into the same folder as your code, and then you have to add the ones to your project. And then once you have that, then you can use these icons inside of your PyQt interface. And if you do, make sure to, it's licensed under the Creative Commons 3.0 license. So if anyone asks you, and if you were looking for like, so how do I actually Kamiyamane, give him credit and give him a little bit of love. All right, so let's take a look at what this all looks like if we're going to use a button inside of this. Okay. Now for here, I just simply implemented a button with a little bug on it. Now notice what I did was I had to go in and copy my texture, my PNG, to the folder of where I'm storing all of my code. And then what I had to do is make sure to go into my Visual Studio, and I said add existing item. And then I had to make sure that, oh yeah, I want all files. And then I had to make sure that this, like I said, bug PNG was added as part of my project. So I can see this bug project as an available asset. But now, when we define this button action, we identify a new thing in here called QIcon. And I say, okay, use this icon, and as a parameter into this function, we say bug.png. All right. Now, a QIcon is not a Qt widget. It's part of the Qt GUI library. So if we included this and we ran it and we said, hey, bub, I don't understand what QIcon actually is. Well, that's because you forgot to include QIcon as part of your import from the very beginning. And you're not going to get it from the Qt core. You're not going to get it from the Qt widgets. You got to get it from the Qt GUI. But once you do, then you can bring that in, and then you're ready to go to town. Okay, now notice here I've got a nice little bug inside of it. Instead of my little text, I have a little bug, and it behaves exactly the same thing here. Now notice that I created a little bit of functionality in here so that my Boolean expression kind of toggles on every frame. So let's take a look at the code to see how this actually is pulled off here. All right, and so here, and where it says set checkable, we set it to true. So basically what's going to happen here is it's going to flip, or it's going to toggle its state every time we click it. And so that's why when we click it, it actually goes from true to false, false to true. All right, so therefore now we could really go crazy. You could actually add as many different icons as you want. And so I went a little bit ape nuts here, and then I brought in a second action, and if I've got this first action where I'm going to call bug PNG, I've got the second action where it's going to call bug plus, and I'm going to call it my button 2. And so I now have 2 buttons sitting on here. Oops, I forgot to change my executable to this. Okay, now let's try running it again. Okay, I actually added a few things to the toolbars and not just an extra bug. What I added was, okay, I added a bug button, and we click this, it says true, false, true, false, true, false. And when I had this bug plus button, it clicked true, 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 okay. And now, but when I press this, it says my button 2, and then bug button. And then I also have a little checkbox here. This will cause the state of my my bugs to flip. So I click this and it goes true, true, true. All right, and false. And so this identifies it as, we can set this as be true or it can be false. So it's a little bit of extra stuff. So you can see we're just kind of adding stuff, a whole lot of stuff on here. And okay, so I added a separator, which kind of separated the two widgets or the two actions from each other. And then here it is, I just created a little checkbox. Notice that I did have to include checkbox along with the status bar and along with the Q action, the Q icon. So I did have to include that one as well. So the little checkbox is kind of like the, and so that's all we add, and so we can really go off the deep end. Here I created this one called Widgets Oh Plenty. And so here is a little variation of this function of where I created just a sequence of widgets, a checkbox, a combo box, a date edit, a date time edit, a Q dial, a double spin box, a combo box, an LCD number, a line, blah, 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 all the way to time edit. And I said, okay, for W in widgets, layout, and then say add widgets. Okay, so what this is, I've added something else called a layout. A layout says that, okay, what we're going to be adding here is laying out in a nice horizontal fashion. But we're going to lay out all of the widgets in here. So not much interface is required to get this going, but when we execute this, we're going to end up with this big old monstrosity. Oop, we forgot to set that one again, so let's make this the active component. All right, let's get this running again. Okay, there it is. There's an example of all of the possible widgets that we might incorporate into one of our UV sessions. And these are all customizable and all parameterizable. And that means we could go to town and change on this. Now, mind you, again, I am just covering the very tip of the PyQt iceberg. I'm just giving you the very essentials on how to get things going with this. This is by no means an all-encompassing course. So what I'm doing is just showing you what all these widgets look like if they're all laid out. And notice that they don't do anything when I press them. I just said, okay, bring up these widgets. Okay, now notice that we're going to have to rewrite our callback box. So how do we want to create a callback box that not only stops things, but it creates another separate window that we want to interact with our user? So what we can do is create a something called a dialog window. Now notice up here, I've just given up on adding up all of my widgets and all my objects. And I say, okay, from the Qt widgets, just give me everything. From my Qt core, just give me everything. And from my Qt GUI, yeah, just go ahead, give me everything. And so here I have my objects before. And so now my button box, I have something extra. Now inside of this, I'm going to bring up a Q dialog box. Now a Q dialog box, remember how I said that the Q application, when we go into the exec, what it does is it spawns a new thread and then loops on that thread? Well, when you create a Q dialog, it does the exact same thing again. It spawns another thread, and then it now pulls on that thread until, and it blocks all interaction from the user from the parent window. So that's what the Q dialog does, and it says, okay, it creates a block, and it says, hey, bub, focus on me. Get me done first before I do anything. And so that's what the Q dialog widget actually performs. So let me go ahead and, is this still going? Okay, let's go ahead and set this one as my go-to file, and I execute this. Okay, there it is. Now when we hit one of our buttons, here's our dialog box. Notice that we can't do anything, and Windows is complaining to me, said, hey, bud, you're trying to do stuff, and I'm not going to allow you to do it. But instead, we have this dialog box that's going, hola. It's just basically saying hello. And then we say, we don't know what to do, so because we just basically created a default day. But now it's not going to allow us to do anything until we resolve what to do with this dialog box. So in this case here, I'm going to close X. And now notice that nothing happens. So if we can go on to, we can just go ahead and start manipulating this. Or if we wanted to bring up the dialog box again, we can press the button, and there it is again. All right, now this is typically what you're going to try to do if you want to access or query the user. Are you sure you want to do this? Because this is going to crash everything. And are you really sure that this is what happens? All right, so let's go ahead and add a little bit of functionality to this dialog. Now, what I did here was I created a brand new class. Now this class is called a custom dialog. Now notice that this is a child class of the QDialog. And then when it gets called, we're going to do nothing but call the constructor for the parent class, which was the QDialog. And so in this, we're going to say, just a simple hello. But for the buttons, we're going to create two buttons. And by the way, this is a logical OR. So this is creating the two buttons for this. We're going to create a dialog button box and a dialog button box. So we're going to for make it, one is OK and one is cancel. So there are two different buttons that we could. We could bring in an OK button or we could bring in a cancel button. Okay, and so this actually creates the button box widget. And then if it is OK, which is the accept, then we're going to go with button clicked. And then we actually have a function here called button click. And then what this is going to do is going to call the Q core application, and it's going to call instance and then quit. So that's going to exit the overall application in a very elegant fashion. Now, if it says self-reject is a parent function that basically does nothing. So we don't have anything in here. And just to keep everything straight, we are going to have put in a vertical layout here. So everything is kind of laid out in a nice vertical fashion. And then we're going to add this widget, this button box to our widget, which is in our dialog. So this is just the new dialog class that we added in order to handle just this brand new window. Now notice that this gets called when we have the button clicked. Then here it is, dialog equals our custom dialog class. And then when then we're going to say, okay, if it execs, then we're going to print success, or if it fails, just prints cancel. So basically, if we want it to exit, then we're going to print success, or if we want to keep it around, we just hit the cancel. Okay, so this is just going to exit elegantly from our function. So let's go ahead and execute this. Nope, not what I wanted. Come back to me, Johnny. Yeah, sorry, folks. Got Devo on the brain. Had a lot of Devo on my mind as of lately. Gonna have to do something devoted here. All right, so now we have our function here, and here's our dialog window, and here it is. Here's our Lambda callback. Now, if we go ahead and press the bug button, we get a new dialog box, and it says hello, and then we're asking us make a decision. We want to click OK. Now, if we hit OK, or hit cancel, then this is our reject function. Nothing happens. Now, if we were to click this again, we click OK. This is what happens, and the application ends. Notice here in our dialog box, it reported that. So when we click true, nothing happened, and so it was cancel. So click true, basically, if something happened. Then when we hit cancel, that means, okay, it exited without any kind of problem. Okay, now that is a very rough and very cursory and very, very obtuse introduction into PyQt. If you really want to become a student of PyQt, my suggestion is to download the PyQt library and start playing around with it and playing with all the various tools that are available to you. This is like going to take a long time to work on, and there is a lot to deal with. And so it will take probably a good month of playing with on a steady basis, day after day, in order to get working in a nice, functional, direct way. So give it some time, give it some patience. But if you put the time in there and really understand how the Qt library works, you're going to find that all of the widget libraries, whether it be PyQt or any of the other of the widget libraries that you could use, they all basically look and feel the exact same way. You learn one, you've learned them all. And so that's why you want to spend the time and actually just learn the interface and get it done. All right, folks, guess what? With this, it wraps up all that I wanted to cover with Python. Now, I know that this has been really fast and really cursory, but it should give you a basic understanding that now what you could do is you've gotten the basics, and you now know essentially the fundamentals of object-oriented programming. you know how to deal with the classes, you know how to deal with interrupts, you know how to deal with special cases, you know how to deal with input and output into files, and you know how to create a GUI. For you as a tech artist, you now have the fundamentals of Python for whatever you're going to need to do. And these are basically the elements. And then all that's left for you to do is to really own these tools and techniques and make them your own. Play with them. Get familiarized with them. You're not going to remember them, so you're going to create a bunch of Python functions. You're going to store your library on your thumbnail drive or on your USB drive, and you're going to access them when you need to. But when you go back to them, you'll be able to say, oh, okay, yeah, I don't remember, but now I do. I remember them real quick. So keep these functions around and use them to your advantage, and you'll see that they get you far. All right. Now, let's see. If you are interested in more Houdini stuff, we're going to talk with more Houdini stuff today, where today we're going to be continue dealing with the DOPS extravaganza, and today we're just going to deal with part 1 for rigid body dynamic constraints. And tune in next week for TechArt Talk Live when we're going to, and that's going to be the 2nd of April, April 2nd, we're going to have an introduction to real-time visual effects. Now, real-time visual effects is another behemoth topic of all that is involved of being a tech artist. If you want to devote your entire career to real-time visual effects, you would have no problem. And so I'm going to give a quick introduction to the whole concept of real-time visual effects, and then I'm going to spend some time afterwards going into, all right, give us the Cliff Notes version of the real-time visual effects. So I'm going to give the introduction to that next week. All right, folks, if you like what you saw today, go ahead and on the little button here on the YouTube with a little subscribe button, go ahead, subscribe to me and become part of the YouTube, or go ahead and check out Chris Rhoda and check me out on Facebook or on LinkedIn and just kind of like drop me a line, say hello, or if you want, link me up, or go to TechArt EDU, which is also on Facebook and on LinkedIn, and kind of like drop in a line, say hello, make sure we know that you're there. But if you really want to help us, kind of like come on over to this website, techartedu.com. If you go ahead and check that out, there is a little sign in where if you go, you can go and enter your email address, and then I will make sure that you get all of the latest updates and stuff. Now, we haven't done too much lately because I've been really focusing on traveling and been focusing on getting the first version of real-time visual effects for the technical artist. I'm finishing up the book for that, and so I really am focusing on getting that finished. I haven't really updated many of the articles lately, but Yolanda Patino has been doing an awesome job creating the latest of images for the book, and so it's really coming along. So look forward to that before the year's end for sure. All right, so thank you very much for dropping by. Thank you very much for spending your time and let me go over into this little introduction into PyQt and the overall Python library. Thank you very much, and I will see you all again next week. Have a great week. Bye.